and to give you some idea where this all started. This started 3 years ago at Ecology when Tom Pastor said, at the time, he was going to be the host for Whole World Single Power, and he said, you know, I'm really concerned about how the world is changing. It's changing now in ways we've never seen, and we really ought to take this up. And he asked my help. So Tom was the prime mover, and I'm very grateful to him for his trust that he would ask me, and for the rest of the team who has worked really, really hard for almost 3 years to put this together. So Green Dharma, we've never done something like this, as you can see. We're figuring it out as we go. Sounds new. Is it really so new? Maybe it's actually part of a fairly old tradition. It's one of the initial teachings I first heard in 1974, when you were thinking all religions are different, when you stopped thinking all religions are the same. And there were meetings like this, multiple meetings, where as students we were challenged to put down our ideas, put down our attachment to the form of other beliefs, and to share and to go beneath the form to don't know, to the original mind. And so the form is not important. If you meet somebody, how do we raise this issue? How do we raise it in a respectful way with almost anybody about don't know mind? That was a very powerful teaching for me back in the early 70s with a Marxist sister and all kinds of people. I was campaigning against nuclear power. I was very attached to name and form at that time, so it was very helpful. Okay, well, times really are changing. There is one opinion that the reason we have civilization is that our climate has been more stable in the last 10,000 years than it has been in 100 million years. That in this unusually stable time, civilization could arise. And right now, climate is becoming less and less recognizable. Nobody knows where it's going and what's going to happen. We also have issues of mass change in politics. Last year, every day in the fall, another 1,000 people showed up in the main train station in Vienna. The people were getting really, really scared. What does this mean? Where will it stop? Actually, every year, 1 million people from Africa try to get entrance into Europe. And this, if you look at climate change, is only the tip of the iceberg. If the oceans are flooding, we will see 50 million people looking for new places. We actually have, in our audience, one of the first climate change refugees. Carol got tired of going shopping in South Florida and coming back from shopping and finding the street was flooded and you couldn't get back to your house. They have a name for this now, king tides. So it's just the beginning. And Shanghai is already starting to flood in ways they've never seen. The politics. I have heard that statement on both sides of the Atlantic. I no longer recognize my country. I no longer feel at home in my country. Things are so strange. People are treating each other with so little respect. I no longer feel at home. So change is happening on many, many levels. And how can we get into this? Well, it's not my job to tell you. My job as an organizer is to give you a space for you to look at this. But I wanted to share with you some good news that in corners that you didn't suspect, there are other people who are really interested in a don't know mind and keeping an open mind while we deal with change we've never ever seen before. That should be a nice portrait of me as a field ecologist, and I'm going to tell you about ecologists, but ecologists of my kind, applied ecologists, are certainly interested in that, and they'll tell you stories on that kind. Businesses, many businesses trying to become sustainable, in trying to figure out how they've gone wrong, how to save the business, have suddenly realized that a don't know mind is extremely important to get beyond their prejudices and find out what they really were doing wrong in the way they're thinking, in the way they see the world. Communities, schools, and local communities also are investing in these kind of learning processes that involve trying as a group to hold the don't know mind with mutual respect. Now, it may not be the same don't know mind that we think of in Zen. That remains to be seen. The point is they recognize the importance and are reaching in that direction. And we should see this as an opportunity. We should see all the work we've done as an entry point for contributing to these people who realize that in order to deal with the world changing faster than they've ever seen, that we have to learn as a group how to cultivate a don't know mind, respect each other, and move through difficult territory. So let me tell you a story. The ecologists and many natural scientists up to the 50s were puffed up with pride because we had 150 years of incredible dramatic breakthroughs. The power to explain was in some cases stunning. The biggest drop in religiosity in the United States happened in the 1950s when we had penicillin. We had one scientific miracle after another, and science seemed to have this incredible explanatory power. But starting in the 50s, we started to have incredible disasters that we couldn't explain. 400 years of successful fishing, and in 25 years, trash, and we have no idea if it'll ever come back. I'm talking about irreversible change we can't explain. Same with forest fires based on ecological evidence and a certain political outlook. We forbid forest fires for 100 years, thinking that this would protect us. It only made us more vulnerable. There are over 180 million hectares in the United States ready to burn. And this last summer, we had 10,000 wildfires all across the West. So an increasingly vulnerable landscape. And what is it that we saw in all of these spaces as ecologists? What got us into trouble was certainty. The certainty that we were right, the certainty that if we applied a certain kind of formula, that we would somehow be able to understand it better and control it even better. And it got us into deeper and deeper trouble. Example. Lakes that for centuries had been clear, in an afternoon of a thunderstorm would be churned up, become muddy, and that despite 50 years of research and all kinds of efforts, they would stay muddy. We still don't understand how to get them back. This is where the conquistadors in New Mexico grazed their cattle for 300 years. In the space of 10 years in the 1880s, it became a shrubland, and we've had over 70, 80 years of research, and we still don't quite understand how it happened and how to get back. So for all of these very proud scientists, these were humiliating surprises. And they realized that they had to learn to unlearn. They had to learn how to keep a mind that was much more open. And that means that they might have to learn how to talk to the engineers they used to be fighting, really listen to them. They might have to learn how to talk to social scientists, anthropologists, and others. And this is very difficult because even within the natural sciences, each science has a different standard for what is good science, a different vocabulary. It's not easy. We have to learn how to talk to politicians and work with them, not just the big ones, but the local mayor. We had to also learn how to talk to farmers. We had to learn how to talk to fishermen, hunters, as well as shepherds. In this area I was trained in Florida, the scientists gave up on totally trying to understand the Everglades with science, and a hero of that movement in the early 70s, Art Marshall, left the federal building and went down to a bar to talk with a local fisherman. Tell me, what's on your mind? Tell me what you see. It was this atmosphere that has been driving applied ecology when we try to help people deal with change. We're all in it together. We as ecologists don't have the answer. No one has the answer. But we have to manage. We can't throw away our responsibility to manage, even if we're ignorant. The starting point was to admit you're ignorant, to admit you don't know. And so we've been working on how to keep this open mind through the process. Now, what we would do is go into, instead of coming a scientist, you know there's a thing, if you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Well, instead of coming into the community and saying, you've got this problem, we would ask, is there a problem? And sometimes it would be a shock to see that the people might say there is no problem. And you go, but if you could agree on it, what we found is the simplest kind of description of a problem that everyone could agree on, so we weren't arguing about a problem, is it's a trend. Things are changing. Unemployment's getting too big. Biodiversity is crashing. Something like that. Then, when we agreed on a problem, where did the problem come from? And we found that questions were much more interesting than answers. Questions pointed out where to start looking for ways out of your problem. And finally, what can we do about it? How do we engage? Here we found that the actions that were most interesting were the ones that test your best question. So notice that the emphasis in the early 20th century was, I am the scientist, I know, and here is the answer to your problems. Politicians wanted this from us. They wanted so much to look like the happy grandfather who could solve all the problems. But actually, when it turns out, that got us into trouble, and it was much better to go away from answers and go to the questions and stay with them. Now, we don't have time for this. This phase of looking for where a problem comes can take months to years of hard work. Businesses and communities, people trying to save ecosystems, sometimes a decade of work. We're not going to do that. But the model for us is, since people are worried about how the world has changed, let's listen to each other and see what are we concerned about. We're going to look at trends, and what do we consider engagement? So this is a light exercise in the kind of don't know mind that ecologists have been struggling to achieve for the last 30 years. Now, trends. You'll see a lot of this sort of thing, and there's every reason to be concerned. This was 3.59 million square kilometers back in 75, back when I was in the Providence Zen Center. And here, it's down to 1.25, the cover of ice in the Arctic. And you can see here the outline for the maximum extent. That orange there is the maximum extent, and where it is at the minimum extent. But I think that it's not my job to tell you. It's the last thing I want to do is tell you what trends you should do. This is to open the door to you to talk about what you're concerned about. But I would like to tickle you a little with some things you can consider. What happens, here's an interesting trend. What happens when on purpose you forget history? When the tsunami came in Fukushima, they went and looked afterward and found that the people of the region actually knew very well that tsunamis came. They even knew how far they came. This stone in Japan is set on the hillside where the top of the wave came from. And the stone is telling you, don't build below the stone. But like the Europeans and like the Americans, we've had an amazing arrogance since the Second World War, and we have built in many places that we really shouldn't build. In floodplains, in places that burn, in places with earthquakes. And we're dealing with that arrogance right now. So this tsunami, also, here's another arrogance. The Native American peoples, when people arrived in the Northwest, they said, a century ago we had an enormous earthquake. It flew us out of our beds at 9 o'clock at night in 1700. The only evidence we saw were these ghost forests, but in the last 15 years, someone finally put it together, and they've now looked at the geological record, and every 400 years in the Pacific Northwest, there is a massive earthquake, about 9, which will probably destroy everything for a kilometer in on the coast. This is in what would be, many people thought, the calmest region in North America. And these ghost forests are the evidence of that from 1705. And now, finally, they were going to believe the Kwakiutl and the Makan and the other native peoples who were telling them about their legends. They're finally listening to them. But in that case, your arrogance, you weren't open, and you said, we know better. We're from Europe. Now, there's another trend here, and that is if you're the people who believe in the singularity, and that is that at one point our computers and everything will supersede us and we'll have a super civilization that's technological. Many people feel technology will save us. We'll have incredible electronic bikes, God knows what kind of telephones, we'll have smart houses that are smarter than we are. And we will find a way out of our problems technologically. No doubt there are amazing inventions on the way. But consider this. And oh, by the way, ecologists like me, I've got my degree in ecological engineering. These are highways we built for animals, so animals can cross our highways. And because if you go now to the north of Scotland, you will find fish that used to be only in France. And you'll find birds also that used to only be in France. The birds and the fish are moving, but how do mammals move? How do the animals deal with climate change? And so people are saying we have to make our landscapes more mobile so animals themselves can vote with their feet. So here's another concept where you take an entire river corridor and this becomes a corridor by which animals can move. We have wonderful engineering solutions, whether it's computer engineering or ecological engineering. But there are other trends that people are only now, to me, really looking at. Muncie, Indiana is the most studied city in the United States because it's considered the average. What happens, if it happens in Muncie, it's going to happen everywhere. And they noticed that in Muncie, this is 10-year-old information, the institutions that used to hold our society together, the bedrock of our society, when I was born in 1950, the public schools, the traditional churches, the city government, national government, that's what used to hold everything together. They were thoroughly discredited. People had no trust in them. This is where you get these huge mega churches now coming. We're going to have new churches, we're going to have new government or no government. God knows where we're going with the politics. The point is a lack of trust, to the point where there is no single source of information where people feel they can get the truth. It used to be we consider journalists, we consider scientists, or someone. Right now, no one believes anyone else. And so we're in an incredible, how can you use the technology? And I'll explain how, as an ecologist, this impacted me. So, oh, by the way, this is how we learn. This is how we relate to each other. And this, only the Chinese could have come up with it in a special way for people to affect. Now, you know that if you drive on the road and you see a cross by the side of the road, or if I hike in the Alps and I see a cross, that means somebody died there. So unfortunately, this probably means somebody died. And that's why they spent the money to do this. It's dangerous, and we're not paying attention. But this is the transition to new technology. Now, this is a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's imploring us in working on your true self to become your true self. How could you become the forest, become the river, become the ozone layer? How is that your self would extend without bounds? Well, I want to tell you a little bit about this way in which we as ecologists try to learn to listen and maintain an open mind with people long enough that anybody could contribute and really help us. First of all, I want to say this isn't a call for individual heroes when we talk about engaging. We don't need more Supermen, and we don't need more Wonder Women. And I emphasize this because usually when you see things about engaging with climate change, it's your responsibility. It's kind of a John Wayne, rugged individualist culture, and you're supposed to personally clean your act up so that you can save the world. And this is a very North American perspective, which doesn't necessarily work everywhere. And of course we have individual responsibility, but what I wanted to say is there are many, many ways to engage. As a loving couple, as a family, this is a family I knew in Burkina Faso. As a Sangha, this was a wonderful Yeonmin Jonjin we just finished in Spain. Fantastic time together. And as a nation. And I'm not leaving many, many others out. So solutions and ways to engage are not just the rugged individual. There are many, many ways for you to join hands with other people and make a difference. This is a very abbreviated way, but the point is if you have a problem, we found the best thing to do is to have everyone look at questions that are important, as opposed to everyone scrambling for an answer. What questions would point us in the right direction?
Then we pick the most interesting questions, we act on them, we monitor them. So this might be months of work, and this might be years of work,
but always the idea is that the world is so complex and so dynamic that whatever you're doing will be out of date. And you have to look again, and then you have to look again, and then you have to look one more time. In fact, there is no end to this learning cycle. And so, as opposed to the culture of always having an answer and being certain and holding strong to that positive answer, this is one in which you say, the learning never stops. And what's important is who has the best questions? Who is pointing us in the right direction? We're not caught up with the world. The world will always be some steps ahead. But how do we stay close? That's as good as it gets. Okay? So this is how we go into a community of people, for instance, myself going to people where they're flooding too much and they're worried about climate change. What are we going to do? How might we change things that we will not be wiped out by climate change?
I don't have too much time. This is a map made by people who do this kind of thing professionally all the time. And they say the reason it's hard to work with people in groups is most people look at the tip of the iceberg. They just look at events. They don't look at the pattern. They don't connect the dots. So we try to deepen people's look for the trends. How is things changing? What's your history? If we can, we try to look at how did you get there? But below all of this, and this is why I wanted to point this out to you as practitioners of Zen, everything above here depends on this, your mental models. How you frame the world, how you filter information, whatever prejudice you have are going to determine the policies you use, the way you structure your society, which is going to generate your trends, and out of this pop your events. So for people who study the mind, people who are interested in keeping an open mind, you are people who can really contribute to that effort of recognizing what mental models we have and how it is that they affect our lives. So let me give you some examples. This is the Tisa River in Hungary, between Ukraine and Austria. This is what it looked like in 1700. For military and industrial purposes, it was industrialized, maximized grain production. They have only had bigger and bigger floods. And these people have basically lived behind the dikes for 300 years. Their imagination is framed by this. If you talk to a Hungarian farmer, he will tell you that water is a devil walking on the landscape. But it could be our best ideas now for how to adapt to climate change is that you break the dikes open. Intelligently, you can break them open and allow the floods in a controlled way to flood. There are ways in which you can back the water up into the landscape. The same way I was designing and building fires and controlled fires in Florida. The way the Native Americans did it for millennia before that. You can take a disturbance and ride it like a wave if you know what you're doing. So the disturbance of climate change, we may be able to intelligently find out. We're ignorant. I don't know exactly. And that's the problem. We need experiments. But how can you do experiments when everybody has an idea that water is the devil? In an atmosphere where no one trusts each other, the only way you can do an experiment like this, everyone in the landscape has to join hands and say, we agree to this risk. We agree to try this out. That is how we will find out how to live when we get bigger and bigger floods, which we will, because the rainfall is getting more intense. I want to close with this. I was in Hungary for a presentation, and an activist who had spent 30 years of her life, first in protesting and then negotiating, managed to secure 32,000 square kilometers of rainforest in British Columbia. But not just the rainforest. Also, the people who make a living. This isn't to make more national parks. They found a solution where people could make a living, but also the biodiversity was protected. It took 30 years. And so I wanted to suggest that to you. It's not just you can do it at the couple, family, sangha, nation level, but there are solutions you can come up with in an hour, in a day, There are some that take 30 years of effort, and it's worth it. So I'm doing all of this to stretch your imagination. In other words, because what we want to do after this, Claudia is going to talk about social trends after this, is this is about you. This is a meeting for you to talk and share with each other, maybe in ways you haven't before, as a Sangha. How is my world changing? What is it I'm paying attention to? What do I want to know more about? And what could we do about it? How can we engage it? So the entire thing is a stage for you to do this in ways that we can share and learn from each other. Oh, I just wanted to give you one more example that I love very much. If you go next to Cape Kennedy, where they launched the rockets, there's a place they don't allow anyone to go. And the reason is that if a rocket fails, they need a place to let the rocket crash. So they don't want anyone ever to go into that red zone. It's a no-go zone. And lo and behold, on the edge of that zone, they're catching world record fish. So these are marine reserves, and they find if you give nature a total rest, you get a rebound that's unimaginable. And people are doing this. But this is to me again to say, how is it you hold hands with everybody and say we won't go there? A friend of mine studied shamans down in Brazil, and it turned out shamans can help biodiversity, because the shaman is the protector of the sacred grove, of the place, the no-go zone. If you want to go hunting, you have to ask the shaman before you go out. And then that way, they found where a shaman was, and if the people believed and trusted in that shaman so that everyone followed, you would have higher biodiversity. So I give these all as ways to tickle your imagination for how people can contribute. That trust that we all need to have in order to take these experiments and learn with each other, because no one has the answer right now. No one. We must experiment in order to find out how to move through these changes. And to me, a don't-know mind will be absolutely essential for them. So, let's share and learn from each other. Thank you.